You are listening to the Bat Flip Podcast, a baseball podcast from Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Damian and Matt.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damian, here with my co-host, Matt. We are coming to you on February 9th of 2021, just a couple days after that fantastic Super Bowl we just had between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Kansas City Chiefs. What did you think about that Super Bowl, Matt?
Oh boy, it was it was something. I mean, I was very surprised, honestly. I thought the Chiefs were by far the better team, and it just goes to show you that if you turn the ball over and you make a bunch of penalties, anything can happen when you've got two pretty good teams matching up. So
Absolutely, and it just shows like what that offensive line being out for Kansas City, that it really actually did impact the game more than people thought it was going to, myself included. But we had a really packed week. We'll talk about how the league and the players finally came to a close on their discussions of what the
that's a good
season's.
way to put it. I don't know if it was an
Yeah,
agreement. I think it was just a close.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, just closing. I mean, I don't think they were actually going to ever agree on anything, which we'll talk about here. But players are starting to sign. We saw pretty much the last remaining big free agent sign. I mean, we have one more out there, which we'll talk about later in the show. But before we jump into the actual moves, let's go into this closure of what this season's going to look like.
Yeah, so basically, with the coronavirus still going on, and although vaccines are starting to get out, numbers seem like in a lot of places are starting to go down a little bit. There's a little bit of encouragement there, although it's still a very serious ordeal right now. They did bring back some of their special rules from last year. These are not long-term rules, but just for this season, because the potential is still there for there to be some COVID cases on teams that cause some postponements. They're bringing back the seventh inning doubleheaders and the extra innings runner on second rule, which I don't really like either one of those rules long term, but I totally get it this year for the lack of the potential that there might have to be a large amount of makeup games for some teams. So that's coming back, and then not coming back are somewhat surprisingly the universal DH. Although I think most people are kind of expecting that to be in next year's new collective bargaining agreement, and the expanded playoffs, which I think is a very good thing that that's not coming back, because when you play a 162 game season, it's a big difference for playing a 60 game season, and expanded playoffs are not good. In fact, I was reading somewhere earlier today that back in 2019, before obviously before all the pandemic and everything and the expanded playoffs talk started, the number 16, the 16th team, which by the way is over half the teams in Major League Baseball, make the playoffs in that scenario. The 16th team would have been the 78 and 84 Texas Rangers. So that just goes to show you, with all due respect to the Rangers, they were not a very good team in 2019, and that just kind of goes to show you what the expanded playoffs would bring. That team would have been able to, have a 3-game series to potentially upset the Yankees, or the Astros, whichever one was the one seed. I don't even remember, but um, that will lead us into pitchers and catchers reporting on February 17th, for most teams, and some on the 18th for spring training. So exciting stuff. We're only a week and a day from the 17th, it looks like. So we're getting close.
Yeah, I mean, when we record our next podcast, it'll be the next day that pitchers and catchers start reporting. So, one interesting little nugget about that this year is that, sometimes the position players will report early as well, but due to, part of this agreement, we'll just call it that for now, but is that position players can't report early. So they're going to have to report on the 22nd or 23rd for their respective teams. So that'll be, another week away from that. But baseball's here pretty much. The Super Bowl is pretty much the last thing before the baseball season really starts kicking off. So it's very exciting. And I think you kind of see that players are starting to sign. You're probably going to see more trades start happening just for clearing off roster spots, and minor league signings and stuff start happening. So a lot going on right now in the baseball world, which is more than we can say for most of this offseason. So
Yeah. So let's get into some free agents if you're ready, Damien, and we can start off here with a guy who is going back to the same team he was with last year, although that team he never played for. That would be Andrew Chafin.
yeah, Andrew Chafin was acquired by the Chicago Cubs at the trade deadline. He ended up being injured and didn't pitch for them at all last year. He signs a $2.25 million deal with a mutual option, which is for a price of $5.25 million. He has a $500,000 buyout on that, which will most likely happen. Um, Chafin's been a solid reliever ever since he's come up. 2015 with the Diamondbacks, he pitched 75 innings, had a 2.76 ERA, a 3.35 FIP. He's had one bad year, that was 2016, but every other year after that, he's been a really good, lefty reliever. Most of the time, he was in that come get one or two batters out for a little bit, but he's also been a guy who can pitch, an inning or maybe multiple innings at a time and still be very solid. So it'll be a good pickup for the Cubs. Getting a nice lefty reliever in that bullpen, which can always use some help.
Yeah, he's a guy who, like you said, battled injury. He only pitched in 9 2/3 innings last year, so his stats were not very good. But it was a very, very short season, and one even not even implosive, but just bad outing could hurt you big time in that amount. But in his career, 3.67 ERA, good strikeout pitcher, 9.54 strikeouts per nine. He does walks, a little too many guys. Sometimes that walk rate will spike for him, but 3.87 walks per nine for his career, and only a 3.23 FIP for his career. So that's a very good number. Not fielding independent pitching. So we'll see what happens with Andrew Chafin. I think the Cubs desperately needed to add to that bullpen because they had not added very much to it, and it was pretty much the worst bullpen in the league other than the Phillies last year. It was a disaster. And they've already lost a couple of their better relievers from last year, and Jeremy Jeffress being one of them. So, um, they really needed to bring in somebody, and Andrew Chafin would be a guy who I think fits that bill pretty well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we'll jump from one Central Division to the other Central Division. So we're going to jump over to the AL Central, and a guy who's staying in division but signing with a new team. That's Alex Colome. He's switching teams from the Chicago White Sox to the Minnesota Twins, signing a one-year, $6.25 million deal. You would presume to be in a closer platoon, I would say, with it's Taylor Rogers over there, right? Or is it
Yes,
Tyler?
yes, Taylor.
They Tyler. I don't know. They're close enough, but they'd pretty much be in a closer platoon. Colome's been a very good pitcher in his major league career as a closer. Um, pitched 2016 37 saves with the Rays, 2017 47 saves. 2018 he started as a closer, 12 saves, and he got traded to the White Sox and wasn't their closer for the rest of that season. But then in 2019 he had 30 saves, and in this past shortened season, even in 21 games, he had 12 saves. So he's a guy who 295 career ERA, 354 FIP, decent strikeout pitcher. Will walk some every once in a while, but he's solid. I mean, just pretty much really good, solid bullpen arm.
Yeah, Alex Colome, I agree with a lot of that. He's a good bullpen arm. His ground ball rate's actually gone up a little bit. It helped lead to 2020. He had a .81 ERA. Now that number was also pretty inflated against his peripherals, which were 297 FIP and a 426 xFIP, which is the measure of um, reducing or going to an average home run per fly ball rate compared to like your batted ball profile you're allowing. So, some of the predictors didn't love him this past year, but a .81 ERA is nothing to scoff at there. He's a guy who has always outperformed those peripherals a little bit. That 354 career FIP and a 295 career ERA. He's a good pitcher. Gets the ball on the ground, gets some weak contact. A little bit unorthodox for a closer in that standpoint. Typically you think of the fireballer who strikes everybody out as the closer, but Alex Colome is a solid reliever. He'll do well with the Twins. He'll go into a situation where he's probably replacing Trevor May, who departed for the Mets earlier in the offseason. So um, I think this is a pretty good signing for the Twins. They bring him in on a one-year contract, so no long-term risk for them. And I think they're going to have a pretty good bullpen once again. So solid move for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a couple other pitchers that we just wanted to mention, we didn't think that we really needed to go in depth on them, was Joaquin Soria signed with the D-backs, Chasen Shreve signed with the Pirates, King Felix Hernandez, who is probably the biggest name on this, he signed a minor league deal with the Orioles. Chase Anderson signed with the Phillies, and Nate Jones signed a minor league deal with the Braves.
Yeah, I thought those were pretty interesting. Joaquin Soria has been around a long time. Good move for the Diamondbacks. They pick up a veteran reliever, Chase and Shreve, who has been with the Yankees, Braves. He, he's been with somebody else as well, but
I think
he
he was with the Cardinals for the Luke Voigt trade, wasn't he?
that might be correct. I believe so. So he signs with the Pirates. The Pirates add a veteran reliever to their bullpen. Good thing to do. Maybe help with some of the young guys, give you some stability there. Felix Hernandez, he actually was really good in spring training last year with the Braves, but we'll see. He opted out of the season. He never got to pitch, so we'll see what he does with the Orioles. Uh, I think that's a cool signing, a buy low type thing for the Orioles. Maybe they can flip him at the deadline if he does really well. Chase Anderson, guy who's been around a little bit, veteran guy for the Phillies to pick up. I assume he'd end up at the rotation there. Maybe a number 4 or 5 type starter for them. And then Nate Jones, I think, is an interesting pickup for the Braves. Guy who has at times been really good, but has battled some elbow problems last couple of years. So, we'll see if he's healthy and ready to go. But the Braves needed some right-handed relief help, and that's going to help them, I believe. I think he'll probably end up on the major league team. So.
Yep. So we'll go into Jonathan Scope now. He re-signed with the Detroit Tigers on a 1-year, $4.5 million deal. Scope is mostly known for his time with the Orioles. His best season was, I believe, it was 2017. He had a 293 batting average, 338 on base, 120 WRC plus, put up 3.7 wins above replacement that year. He's not quite that same player. His on base has dropped a little bit. More to around close to 300. His batting average has dropped, but he had a decent 2020, went batting 278. Um, he's a decent major league second baseman, and he's not going to wow you with anything, but he's going to be pretty solid. He'll hit you, close to 20 home runs. He doesn't play great defense. I mean, probably a little bit below league average defense, but for a team like the Tigers who are rebuilding in that phase, he was there last year with them. I'm surprised they didn't actually trade him for them just to re-sign him this year. Maybe they flip him at a deadline, a more regular trade deadline this year and get something back.
Yeah, I like the idea of the Tigers bringing back Jonathan Scope. I think he's a good guy to have around. He's been on some really good teams back when he was with the Orioles before the Orioles tank started. He's been around a long time. He's a guy who can lead by example. He seems to be, going to go about his business the right way and everything. Um, his career numbers, like you say, not great. He's got a sub 300 on base percentage in his career, one of the lowest walk rates in the big leagues. I believe I looked up earlier in uh, the highest walk rate he ever has run over a full season was like 5.4%, which is atrocious. He strikes out a lot, but he's at times put together some good offensive seasons. This past season in 2020, in the shortened season, he put up a 114 WRC plus, so he was, a pretty good bit above average. Solid hitter at times. He can put the ball all over the field, which leads to a high batting average on balls in play. That helps his value a lot. 10.9 wins above replacement in his career. He's a solid everyday second baseman, and I'm a little surprised that he didn't decide to go to a contender somewhere. But I think it's a good move to bring him back if you're the Tigers, just to have that veteran presence in your clubhouse. Have a guy who goes out there every day. You got some young infielders, guys like Yamar Candelario. Maybe could look up to him a little bit, and I think it's a solid move for the Tigers.
Yeah, it really is. Um, that we'll transition from this second baseman to another second baseman with Colton Wong. He signed a 2-year, $18 million deal with the Milwaukee Brewers that has a third-year club option on that. I believe you said before the show Wong has won 2 Gold Gloves in his career. He's a
Yes.
fantastic defensive second baseman. Can play a little bit of center field as well, and still plays that at a decent clip as well. Walks about 10% of the time, walks about 10% of the time, strikes out, not too much, right around 15%. He's a decent on base guy. Past couple seasons, 361, 350 on base, 285, 265 batting average. He's right about league average. Comes in about a 96 WRC plus. Um, so you'll take that with the level of defense that Colton Wong plays at second and center field.
Yeah, I like this move a ton. This is one of my favorite moves, I think, of the offseason so far. The Brewers really need some stability in their lineup. They've got some guys who are a little bit volatile, guys who are a little inconsistent, strike out a lot. You look at like Keston Hira. He's a guy who you hope that he continues to improve his game as he gets a little bit older, more seasoned. But so far he's been a guy who strikes out a lot and is real streaky. Christian Yelich this past year struck out a ton, was real inconsistent. I think he is closer back to normal Christian Yelich that we saw for his first couple years in Milwaukee after, when in not a shortened season, but still, you add a guy who is a great on base guy. I was really shocked when I looked up Colton Wong's stats and I saw that the last few years he's run a close to 10% walk rate because he's a guy who doesn't hit for power. And, his strikeout rate's been below 15% for a lot of his career. So he walks a lot, great plate discipline. And anytime you have a guy with great plate discipline, sometimes you change their scenery a little bit. You put them in a different ballpark. Miller Park's a place where hitters usually do pretty well. You could see the power numbers go up a little bit, and that's really the knock on Colton Wong is his career 384 slugging percentage is pretty bad. So if he maybe can knock a couple home runs over the short porch and right, and improve on that just a little bit, you could have a really solid player with his defense and base running there. 2019, he put up almost 4 wins above replacement. So this is a guy who, has had some seasons where he was really good. You're getting him on a pretty good deal, and I really, really like this deal for the Brewers. Help them, possibly contend in the NL Central.
Yeah, it's going to make the Central one of the more interesting divisions to watch. None of the teams are going to run away with that division. The Pirates and the Reds are probably going to be way behind everybody else. So that battle between the Cubs, the Brewers, and the Cardinals at the top of that division is going to be pretty fascinating because they've pretty much all made solid moves to upgrade the team, but no one has really separated themselves. The Cubs are taking a little bit of a step back, but they still signed a couple people. We've talked about Jock Peterson, Andrew Chafin today, so it's going to make that division really fascinating to watch about which team decides to actually separate themselves and maybe make a move at the deadline and push all in for it.
Yeah, definitely, probably the most interesting division when it comes to really four teams having a shot at the division title there. Um, the next guy we have on our list that signed, he actually signed, I believe it was today,
Yep.
was Jonathan VR, who is a veteran shortstop slash outfielder slash second baseman, plays a little bit of everything. He signed with the Mets on a 1 year, $3.5 million deal. He had a pretty volatile career. He's a 259 hitter on his career, a 327 on base guy, 400 slugging, 8.3 wins above replacement. This past year was pretty atrocious at the plate. 232 average. He did have a 301 on base, so the walk rate was still pretty good when you compare that to his very, very mediocre average, but only a 292 slugging, which is for a guy who in his career slugs 400, is pretty atrocious. That was a 66 WRC plus. He's not a guy who's going to provide you with excellent defense anywhere. But in 2019 with the Orioles, he hit 274 with a 339 on base and a 453 slugging, career high 24 homers, put up over 4 wins above replacement. So he was an all-star level player in 2019, and also had in 2016 had a fantastic season as well, where he stole 62 bases for the Milwaukee Brewers. So this is a guy who's a little volatile. He's had a couple of really, really good seasons where he felt kind of like an all-star, but other than that, it's been pretty much a replacement level player. So interesting signing. I'm assuming the Mets will hope to get him on one of those good seasons, and we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, he's just seeming to be more of a utility bat that they're going to use all around. Like you said, can play pretty much everywhere for him, which is kind of something that they lack is depth overall. So He'll be decent. And then a guy who you can bring in late in games if you haven't used him as maybe a runner. He's stolen 218 career bases. You talked about that 62 stolen base season. He had 23, 35, 40 after that, and even in this shortened season, he had 16. So he's a guy who can get out there and steal you a good amount of bases and runs the bases very well. So little utility signing for the Mets isn't going to be too bad. Um, so we'll move on to our next signing that we had, which is one we've been speculating on, and I think we even touched about it to be expected for it to be done this week. And that is Yadier Molina re-signs with the Cardinals on a 1-year, $9 million deal.
Yeah, Yadier Molina, a fantastic catcher, especially defensively. In his career, he's put up 54.5 wins above replacement, which is on the cusp of Hall of Fame level. A 9-time All-Star, 9-time Gold Glover. I think at this point you kind of know what you're going to get from him. He's going to be okay at the plate. He's going to hit for a decent average, but he's not a good on base guy. He doesn't hit for a lot of power. He's going to be not quite the defender he once was, but he'll still be pretty good back there, especially as a pitch framer and a game caller. He still does have a pretty good arm, can throw guys out at second, but his biggest value is his veteran leadership, he's a Cardinals legend, and they love him there, and they had to bring him back if he wasn't going to retire. So I think this is a good move for St. Louis.
Yeah, he's been a part of that organization for 16 seasons. So kind of just like what we were talking about with Adam Wainwright before. You couldn't imagine Yadier Molina in any other uniform outside of the St. Louis Cardinals. So, veteran leader, like you said, he's a guy who commands respect behind the plate. And for, a lot of the young pitchers that they have on that staff, Dakota Hudson, Alex Reyes, if he's going to come back this year, Jack Flaherty and everything, these guys really love throwing to him. And Yadier Molina expects them to be, just as good as he is behind the plate. So, a very good signing for the Cardinals. It was one that we pretty much all expected to happen. So
Yeah.
we'll not spend too much time on that one, but we'll move on to Adam Duvall from previously of the Atlanta Braves signs a 1-year, $4.5 million deal with the Miami Marlins.
Yeah, Adam Duvall is a pretty good player. First off, people don't talk enough about it, but his defense, the outfield's pretty good. When you throw him in left field, he doesn't have the range for center or the speed, but you throw him in left field and his defense is pretty solid. But he's a guy who he hits home runs, but he strikes out a ton, and he hits the ball in the air probably too much, which is something we don't hear very often this year these days. But he's a guy who his BABIP runs pretty low. He doesn't get a lot of hits on balls in play, and it's home run or bust for him. You saw that a little bit last year. He hit 17 home runs in the regular season, put up a solid year, but then in the postseason he was atrocious through the first two series, and then got hurt in the first game against the Dodgers. So, Adam Duvall's a guy who he's going to help the Marlins. He's a pretty good upside play for them. We'll see if he's able to continue, kind of what he did in the regular season last year. But he's a fun player to watch. Gets a lot of home runs. He had one of the only players. He might be the only player ever to have 2 3-homer games in a week last year. So that was pretty crazy. But it'll be interesting to see what he does with the Marlins. And I think it's a pretty good move for both sides.
Yeah, a nice underrated signing for the Marlins. Really, like you said, not many people talk about Adam Duvall the way he probably should be talked about as a solid, you know, outfielder that can play a decent defense in left field. He might be able to play a little bit of right field. The defense is going to take a little bit more of a hit over there, but solid signing for the Marlins, who were in the playoffs last year, and there's a little rumblings of them talking about potentially trading one of their first basemen slash outfielders today, anyways. So maybe even see Adam Duvall maybe transition to playing a little bit of first base if that happens.
Yeah, he has played third base some in his career. I'm assuming that they would feel pretty comfortable with him playing first base with his experience being over at third. So
Absolutely. Well, we'll start jumping into the more impactful signings, we'll say. Nelson Cruz, a guy who we can pretty much pencil in for 40 home runs every year now, re-signed on a 1-year, $13 million deal with the Minnesota Twins.
yeah, Nelson Cruz, guy who really a late bloomer. He didn't really turn it on in the big leagues until He really didn't get his opportunity in the big leagues until like age 28 or 29 with the Texas Rangers, where he was pretty good, but he didn't become the Nelson Cruz we know today until he was with the Orioles, and I believe it was 2014 when he had slugged his first 40 homer season, and since then he's been one of the best hitters in baseball. His career numbers: 278 average, 347 on base, 529 slugging. That's a 133 WRC plus, and he's getting on up there on the home run list. He's up to 417 career home runs, so pretty solid there. And then 2019, 2020, just continued doing what he does. In fact, he set career highs at the plate with a 164 WRC plus in his last two seasons. He just keeps getting better and better. So 1 year, $13 million. The Twins needed him back, and I think and obviously he's the DH. His age, I believe this is age 40 season, and it's age 40 season. You never know when a guy might start to fall off, but I think you can probably expect Nelson Cruz to do what he's done the last several years, which is be really good at the plate, and that's what the DH needs to do. So I think for the Twins, that's just exactly what they needed to do.
Yeah, and even the past 4 years, he's really upped his walk rate by, almost a full percent over his career average. His career average is an 8.8, and he's had 10.9, 9.3, 10.7, 11.7 in 2020. His strikeout rate has started rising a little bit, back up to about 27%, which he was close to those numbers a little earlier on in his career. Um, but he guy who doesn't play defense but still put up a 2 wins above replacement pretty much this year, in a shortened season. The year before that put up 4.3. So Nelson Cruz is an impactful signing. Like you said, the Twins had to bring him back for just that clubhouse presence that they have, and a guy who still performs well above what he probably should be performing right now at this stage in his career. So that'll transition us into Marcell Ozuna. He ended up re-signing with the Atlanta Braves on a 4-year, $65 million deal. It has a $15 million club option for, I believe, what year would that be?
I believe that'd be like 2026, maybe
Yeah,
2025.
right around there. That would make the deal overall 5 years at 80 million.
Yeah, I thought this was a great signing, especially the contract they got him for. It's not without a little bit of risk because you are going to have to play him out in the field. But as I pointed out before the show to Damien, Marcell Ozuna won the 2017 Gold Glove in left field, so there is that. He had that high-profile gaff a couple years ago in the outfield where he, scaled the wall, thinking the ball was going to be gone, but it ended up not being gone and hitting on the warning track. And that was pretty bad. But I do think he's better in left field than he gets credit for. The arm is a problem now at this stage. He's had some issues with that arm. We'll see what happens, with him playing defense. But at the plate, he's been really good in his career. A 276 average, 335 on base, 466 slugging. But in 2020, he just absolutely torched everything. 338 average, 431 on base, a 636 slugging, 179 WRC plus. He hit 18 home runs, which led the National League. This guy was insane in 2020. He played some left field still in 2020, but mostly as a DH. The contract I think is a great value. 4 year, $64 million. That's only comes out to be 16 million a year on the AAV, which for a guy who's hit at the level Marcell Ozuna's hit at is a really good deal. I mean, it's if you compare him to like a Nick Castellanos or JD Martinez, who are kind of similar players to him, he's getting paid a lot less than they are on this long term deal. And then there is a little bit of risk to it. He's had a couple years with the Cardinals where he wasn't great. I think his 2019, he was pretty unlucky at the plate. I remember when they signed with the Braves last year, looking at his peripherals and thinking, wow, he really was one of the more unlucky players in baseball last year. And it ended up being the case in 2020. That luck turned around. So don't expect him to put up a 179 WRC plus, but I would think that maybe somewhere around the 140 range is entirely possible for him in 2021. And it's just what the Braves needed. They needed to add that extra bat at length to that lineup. Now you get the 1, 2, 3 of Ronald Acuna Jr., Freddie Freeman, Marcell Ozuna, and then you've got some depth pieces in there like Dansby Swanson, Ozzy Albies. It'll be interesting to see what they're able to do. Travis Darno, a couple of guys that they need some breakouts from to really be that stacked lineup that I think some people are hoping that they could be. But I thought this was one of the better signings of the offseason so far.
Yeah, when, there had been rumors that the Braves were going to be out on him, and then it came down like, oh, hey, the Rays are interested, and now the Braves are back in, and then once this deal finally dropped, you look at the value, and it shocked me that this is how much he got, but I mean that in a bad term. I mean that's a great value for the Braves for what I expected Ozuna to get. I expected him to go out and get a 4 or 5 year deal, but for 110 million, right around there. So to get him at 4 years 65, and if you pick up that option 5 years and 80, that's an absolute steal for the Atlanta Braves. 16 million is not terrible at all for the type of production that Marcell Ozuna is going to bring to that lineup.
Yeah, for sure. And with the universal DH coming pretty soon, most likely, in 2022, you don't worry quite as much about the defensive issues then. But it'll be interesting to see what he does. He definitely will help the Braves this year. And then after Marcell Ozuna, we get down to the guy who I think was most people's number one free agent. He finally signed, and in true Trevor Bauer form, he signed in a dramatic, interesting way and signed a very dramatic, interesting contract, and that's never been done before. So Trevor Bauer signed with the Dodgers on a 3-year, $102 million deal. It's 102, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So the breakdown on it is he's got an option, a player option every year. First year, this coming up season, Trevor Bauer will be making $40 million. And if that's not enough for you, then in year 2 of the deal, $45 million. And in year 3 of the deal, well, it's $17 million, but you still get the point. He's going to be making a lot of money for the next 2 years. So we'll see what happens with Trevor Bauer.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy I've liked Trevor Bauer, since he first came up with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And then he got traded to the Indians because there was some falling out between the coaches. And Bauer is a unique personality. The way he does training, the way he does social media, the way he does a lot of things is very unorthodox, and a lot of people it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. So he burned a lot of bridges to start his career off. Um, it's a lot of money, like you said. But those player options after every year, you would expect this to basically be a 2-year deal for 85 million, pretty much, and opting out of that third year, unless he's either really bad or he's injured. That would pretty much be what you would expect. If you look at Bauer's career, his peripherals, the last couple seasons, he's really outperformed what they've said compared to what his ERA is. 2018, he was on track to win the Cy Young with a 2.21 ERA and 2.44 filling independent pitching. And then he got a comebacker that broke his shin, and he was out for the rest of the year. And then in 2019, he started off really bad with the Indians. He got traded to the Reds, and that poor performance continued over. It came out after a year that he had pitched basically the entire season on torn ligaments in his ankle, and that he had a little bit of shoulder issues from trying to pitch through that. In the 2020 season, he came out and he had a Cy Young. Obviously, he won the Cy Young. 1.73 ERA, 2.88 fielding independent pitching. His strikeouts jumped to 12.33% or Ks per nine. It could be a little bit that he took advantage of, the short schedule. Then he played the weakest 2 divisions with the NL Central and the AL Central. But, if you look at that 2018, it's probably better than what his 2020 was anyways. And I believe in 2019, if he wouldn't have had that ankle and that shoulder soreness or injuries to those, he probably would have been more in line as a true number 1 or number 2 in the major leagues. Is any single player worth 40 or 45 million? I mean, no. I mean, you could even argue that Mike Trout's not worth that. But this is a type of deal that you kind of expected from Bauer. I mean, he had talked about he was only going to sign 1-year deal, and then it came into free agency. He was going to sign. He'd be open to any kind of deal, and we started thinking, oh, he's going to get like a 6 or 7-year deal after this performance. And then it really started narrowing down at the end that it was going to be a maybe a 4-year, 3-year with high AAVs, and it ended up coming down to the Mets and the Dodgers. And a lot of people in the Mets organization really thought that they actually had the deal done. Bob Nightingale, which we joked about me last week messing up, he actually came out and said on when was this? It was Wednesday night, right?
I believe so.
On Wednesday, no, it was Thursday night. It was Thursday night because he signed on Friday. He came out on Thursday night saying Trevor Bauer has agreed to a deal with the New York Mets. And then just about 20 minutes later, Mark Feinsand came out and said that's not the case. And then on Monday morning, it's like, okay, now the Mets have set a deadline of this. And then, right before, I think it was right around noon West Coast time, John Heyman just tweets out like Bauer to Dodgers, and then Bauer drops his video announcing that he had signed with the Dodgers. But it was interesting because Sandy Alderson from the Mets said he had never been so far into a negotiation process with a player and agent and never got the player before. So it really just shows about how fluent that these two teams were against each other. I think what it really comes down to is that Bauer wanted to pitch on the West Coast. LA, he talked about he's grown up there before. Went to games at Dodger Stadium all the time, listened to Vince Scully on the radio. He had even said previously that he wanted to play for the Dodgers at some point in his career. And I think this just kind of all meshed out well. The Mets offered more overall money, but the Dodgers had it, more pushed to the first 2 years of the contract rather than over the entire length of it. So I just think it was a perfect storm. The Dodgers have the money. This is their type of deal. Short years, high AAV. They did the same thing with Bryce Harper. They offered him, I think it was 4 or 5 year deal at 45, $50 million a year. So it just worked out. Now Bauer slots into that rotation with Walker Buehler, Clayton Kershaw, David Price. I mean, they're the only rotation that has 3 former Cy Young Award winners and one who very well could win at any point in the next couple years in Walker Buehler. And you start looking at the list of names like Dustin May, Tony Gonsolin, Julio Urias, like who's going to be the 5th starter, and then who's going to get bumped out of the rotation. So very good signing. I think the obviously the value, it's way above what he's probably worth, but this is kind of a perfect storm for both sides.
Yeah, I think I can echo a lot of what you said. You know, I think it's a good fit. I think if there's an organization that has embraced kind of what Trevor Bauer's personality is, it would be the Dodgers organization. I think there's I think Trevor Bauer is perfectly fine with his personality and stuff. Most places, but I think there's some places that it clashes with the thinking of the organization. I think it kind of did with Cleveland a little bit when he was there. I think that's why they eventually traded him more so than the fact that they wanted to drop a salary or rebuild or anything like that. But I think it's interesting. You know, to play the devil's advocate, the downside of Trevor Bauer is that in his career he's been inconsistent. 3.90 career ERA, 3.85 career FIP. He walks guys at times. 3.43 career walks per nine. Um, and this stat was obviously 2018. I think was nothing really of his fault that he got injured. It wasn't like an elbow injury or shoulder injury or something that would worry you about his durability, but he's never had a 30 start season with a sub 4 ERA. Um, and he's getting paid the highest AAV contract ever for a pitcher. So um, I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to look at. But you look at the good in 2018. He was outstanding. 2.21 ERA, 2.44 FIP, as you said. 2020, the 1.73 ERA was a little bit lucky compared to his 2.88 FIP, but he was also had a 2.88 FIP, which is really good. This is a guy who I think is probably going to be really solid. I don't know if he'll put up another Cy Young caliber season this year, but I think he'll be really good. You add him to that rotation, and Walker Buehler is going to be really good. Clayton Kershaw, maybe not what he was in 2012, 2013, 2014, but he's still a really good pitcher. It'll be interesting to see what they get out of David Price, but you add Trevor Bauer into that conversation, and that rotation is going to be really good. And then beyond that, I mean, I'm not as high on Dustin May as a lot of people are, but I think that Urias and Gonsolin are perfectly fine number 5 options. So I think this is a good deal for them. The high AAV is kind of crazy. It'll be interesting to see what happens with it, though. It'll be interesting to see if Trevor Bauer, as weird as he is, he might opt out after 1 year and abandon the $45 million. So you never know what'll happen with him. But I think this will end up being a good fit. And obviously, Trevor Bauer is extremely talented. So we'll see what happens there. Um, but moving on, we could talk all day about those last two signings, but
Well,
we
one
want to
one
talk about everything.
one little thing I just want to put to that is um, what the Dodgers pretty much did is in one fell swoop they kind of just matched what the Padres have done in this entire offseason. We've talked a lot about the Padres this year and them going, going after the Dodgers, and I think this kind of just says like, okay, you guys were playing, your moves, and well, here's our big move. Like here's our chess move compared to all the moves you've done, and it kind of just, I wouldn't say it pulls the Dodgers way ahead now, but it definitely, if they were even before, it definitely, blips them up a little bit more, or just even furthers that gap just a little bit more.
Yeah, honestly, and to that point, I think that before this move, it felt to me like the Dodgers had maybe fallen behind the Padres going forward to this season because they had lost Justin Turner and Jock Peterson and Kike Hernandez, three pretty big pieces for them that, I think the biggest strength they've had over the last several years has been their depth. And, they lost three good players. Obviously they didn't lose a superstar, but three good players. And Justin Turner was close to a superstar at times. But the Padres had added so much. Blake Snell, they had added Yu Darvish, a couple of those big hitters, Joe Musgrove. But you've got, I think this probably puts the Dodgers back ahead. But that's going to be very interesting. I think you got the East, the NL East and the NL West are both going to be. I mean, the NL East is going to be a bloodbath to a certain level too, but I think two teams really stand out there in the Braves and the Mets, and I guess maybe the Phillies are close to the Mets too. But um, in the West, I think you got the Dodgers and the Padres really stand out as the two best teams out there, and I think it's going to be a really tight, close battle all season. It'll be interesting to watch. So,
I'm so
but
glad I get to watch 18 games of that series this year.
yeah, it'll be entertaining for sure. There will be a lot of good pitching matchups in that series.
For sure.
So moving on, we're going to talk about a quick trade, or two trades actually. One being very very small, but the first one was I thought was a little weird. It's interesting. Um, I'm not super. It's not a super huge trade, but the Texas Rangers sent Elvis Andrews and catcher Aramis Garcia, as well as $13.5 million to Oakland for designated hitter Chris Davis, the one with the K, the one with a C still plays for the Orioles and somehow is still in the big leagues. Catcher Jonah Heim and right-handed pitcher Dane Acker.
Yeah, it's a weird deal. The obviously the A's needed a shortstop, and Elvis Andrews, who's been a cornerstone for that Texas Rangers team through the ones that were going to the World Series and even through these bad years. They pretty much had unseated him at shortstop. They had said that Isaiah Kiner Falefa was going to be the starting shortstop this year. And Elvis Andrews was happy to move into a utility role, which no player is ever happy to move from a starting role to a utility role after being in one organization and one spot for so long. They needed a shortstop, so pretty much they're going to get, and this was a swap of bad contracts for bad contract kind of. The A's are taking on a shortstop that'll be, cost controlled for the next couple of years, especially bringing that $13.5 million over from the Athletics. Elvis Andrus was owed $14 million in both 2021 and 2022, so pretty much they're getting him for 2 years, $15 million. He does have a $15 million option for 2023 that I believe becomes vesting on plate appearances between the 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Elvis Andrews maybe get benched next year for a prospect, or later on, get benched or flipped or something to a team contending. And then Chris Davis, he had kind of fallen out of sorts in Oakland, and kind of this could be a thing where they, new change of scenery would help him, but he's only signed through this year at 16.75 million, so it gets the Rangers a little bit more free cash for that rebuilding process, off, especially after a bad year. And then the A's get a shortstop that they can, plug in and still kind of show that they're trying to contend, even though I don't know how much that's really going to help them, losing some of their other pieces. But it's an interesting deal. It's a little weird, but it's a pretty much trading 1 year of your salary for 2 to 3 years of another salary.
Yeah, that's it. It reminds me just a little bit of the deal with Matt Kemp to Atlanta, or from San Diego to Atlanta, um, when the Braves sent that Hector Oliveira to San Diego, who was a complete dead money because he was basically kicked out of the league, where you're basically trading a couple years of salary relief because I think this deal it's going to be like you said. I think the Rangers were looking for, past this season. They know they're not going to be good this season, and looking at moving, moving a guy who is signed after this season, and then for the A's, it's interesting. Elvis Andrews hasn't been great the last few years. Before that, he had kind of had a career offensive breakout in 2016, 2017, where he had put up over 100 WRC plus for the first time in his career in back-to-back seasons. But this is a guy who's been a really good defensive player for a long time, and he's actually put up 28.1 career wins above replacement. So he's been a solid player for his career. Um, 2020 only played 29 games. I think he battled a little bit of injury, and then, like you said, he didn't play every day at the end of that. I would expect him to kind of do what he's done for the most part, be a pretty good defensive shortstop. Maybe not the best in the league, but solid, and put up maybe just a little bit below league average hitting statistics, and that will average out to a pretty good regular. Um, looking at the prospects that were sent back for Elvis Andrews, along with Chris Davis, Jonah Heim's actually a kind of interesting prospect. He's going to be the number 11 prospect for the Rangers. He's got really good numbers in the upper minors so far. Good hit tool. His raw power is pretty good, but his game power is lacking. And he plays decent defense at catcher. He's not an elite defensive catcher by any means, but he's got a pretty good arm and pretty good blocking skills and everything. So that'll be interesting. He's a guy who's got a good chance to stick there. And Dane Acker, is actually hasn't pitched in the minors yet. He was a 2020 draft pick, a fourth rounder out of Oklahoma. So it's hard to find very much about him. But I think it's interesting. I don't think this trade really affects all that much on either side. I think the A's, you look at you're getting a guy of some value to plug in at shortstop. I don't think it really affects the Rangers much at all. You got a somewhat interesting prospect in Heim coming back. I mean, Chris Davis, probably going to hit 247 this year, like he has for his like for what was it, 4 years in a row or something. He hit
Yeah.
exactly 247.
Yep, it
Uh,
was 4 years in a row.
yeah, he does hit home runs, and it'll be interesting. Maybe he can have a good season this year, hit some home runs, get traded to an American League team who needs a DH. Um, but not the biggest trade, but definitely something to keep an eye on. See how Elvis Andrews does in new colors for the first time in his career. Moving on, another trade that involved the AL West is not a gigantic trade, but Dexter Fowler got moved to the Angels, reunited with Joe Madden, his former manager from when he was in Chicago with the Cubs. He was moved along with some cash, and a player to be named later is going back to St. Louis. So not too much, to discuss there, but um, I think it's a pretty interesting move for the Angels.
Yeah, I think this really came down to that the Cardinals were being honest with Dexter Fowler that he probably wasn't going to be playing much this year. The Cardinals kind of wanted to move on from that, but they still respected what he has done for them as a leader and as a player overall for that team. So they kind of agreed with him that it was time to move on, and they really tried to seek out a deal that he wanted as well. So going, he's from Las Vegas area, so going back to the Angels is a kind of a close to home type deal, and then going back with Joe Madden as well. It's a really good deal for them. He's making $14.5 million this year, but the Cardinals, I believe, are picking up 13 million of that. They're picking up all but 1.75, so pretty close to about 13 million. Um, Fowler's not what he used to be. He's going to be a solid stopgap for them to use for the Angels until maybe Joe Adell's ready or Brandon Marsh is ready. I think they want to get Joe Adell a little bit more time down in the minors, so to force not having to bring him up. But nice little solid deal.
Yeah, one interesting thing I wanted to mention about Dexter Fowler is that when he's throughout his career, he's a guy who has elite discipline at the plate. He walks a ton, especially for a guy like a little bit like Colton Wong, but to a higher level. I mean, he's got a career 13% walk rate almost, and this is a guy who he's not. I mean, he hits some home runs, but he's not a home run hitter. I mean, his career high is 19 in 2019. In the last few years, it's weird. The last few years, his BABIP has dropped. 2018 was he was bad. Negative 1.1 wins above replacement season. Had a 63 WRC plus, only hit 180, but has had a 210 BABIP, which is just completely unsustainably bad. So you expect it to come back up. In his career, his better years, he's been above 300 every year up until 2018 in BABIP, and he's typically sat around somewhere between 310 and 350. He's had a couple 350 BABIP seasons over the course of an entire season. So you look at maybe the Angels can figure out what's causing that BABIP drop. Maybe he's trying a little bit of launch angle and it's not working well for him, or something. But I think it's interesting. His discipline stats, other than the shortened season in 2020, when his strikeout rate was a little bit higher than it had been, are still pretty good. I mean, 13% walk rate 2019. His strikeout rate was up a little bit, but not anything crazy. It still sat just a little above 20%. So, um, he's a guy. He's pretty athletic. He can still steal some bases. Not quite as what he was doing early in his career, but he's still not slow. Um, they might end up having a guy they can throw out there in right field, pair out there with Mike Trout and Justin Upton and maybe Joe Adele, depending on how he starts the season this year. And if not, you got a fourth outfielder, so depth piece. And I think the Angels have desperately needed depth pieces the last few years, so I think it's a pretty good move for them.
Yeah, not too bad. So, well, before we wrap up this show, we kind of just wanted to go an overview of kind of the top remaining free agents that we know of, and just get a little preview of who our winners and losers will be, or who we think they are so far in this offseason. So, the top remaining free agent that we both have is Justin Turner. It's widely expected that he re-signs with the Dodgers, but it's not a given. We've heard the Braves have been interested. We've heard the Brewers. We've heard the Mets. We've heard the Blue Jays to a certain extent, although I think that's going to fade away now that they have Simeon and all that. But he's a name to definitely watch out for. Jackie Bradley Jr. is still out there. Basically, really only heard the Mets with him. So, heard that he wanted a 4 or 5 year deal. I'm not sure any team's really going to give him that. James Paxton, we've heard a little bit of preliminary interest from the Blue Jays and a couple other teams, but nothing really serious on him. I think teams are waiting to see how he responds. He's been really injury prone the past couple years, and I think he had elbow surgery during this year, if I'm not mistaken.
He had
Um,
some kind of surgery. I don't remember if it was his elbow or I don't think it was Tommy John though. So he should be
no,
ready for. I think he should be ready for opening day.
yeah. Jake Odorizzi is a name that we've heard really his market heat up in the past couple days. The Blue Jays have been interested, the Brewers, the Mets, Red Sox, Twins have even talked about maybe bringing him back. There's a lot going on with Jake Odorizzi, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's signed by our next episode. Taiwan Walker is a name who I think is very underrated, and he hasn't gotten the market to develop this year. He's been really bad, but he's shown potential for breakouts if he gets in the right situation, maybe. Kevin Pillar is a guy who's been really solid in his career for a long time. He's probably not an everyday starter, but a fourth outfield type. He can be really solid. Trevor Rosenthal, relief pitcher, is a name that I'm really surprised is not signed yet. He was, he bounced back this last year with the Royals and the Padres and was really really good. His fastball showing the life again. His breaking ball showing the break it used to. So really surprised he's not signed. Roberto Ozuna is a name we haven't heard much about at all this offseason. Some people obviously will not like Roberto Ozuna because of off-field past history. There is rumors that he maybe has a deal with the Angels worked out, but that's not official. That's just from one of the sources from wherever he's from. It hasn't been reported by any of the United States sources yet, so we'll see what happens there. A couple other relief pitchers just really quick. Brandon Workman doesn't have a deal. was really bad last year with Philly and Boston. Mark Melancon, Shane Green, two former Braves relievers that played big parts in their bullpen this past year, still aren't signed. Very surprising from those ones. Sergio Romo is a guy who I expected to be signed as well. He's not what he used to be when he was with the Giants, but he's still been very solid. It was really surprising the Twins said just straight out that they were moving on right away from this offseason. So I probably going to get a minor league deal, which is kind of weird with the past couple seasons he's had been really, really good. Ken Giles is a name who had Tommy John surgery. I was expecting him to sign a 2-year deal with somebody kind of like Tommy Kahnle has, and what we see with starting pitchers, low money in the first year and a little higher in the second year, but just to get that deal done. But he's recently come out and said that he just plans to not sign right now and wait until he's more healthy into the summer, and potentially at least starting to throw the ball again before he'll even consider signing some deals. So those are pretty much the free agents we have left. You want to hit on any of them real quick?
Yeah, just a few guys, and we still have a week left before the players report, so I'm assuming that at least probably most of these relief pitchers get signed by then, and I would assume a majority of these hitters too. There's still several other free agents out there that are more low profile, but these guys I think will likely end up at least in the first week of spring training get that contract. Um, I think that out of the relief pitchers, I mean, the relief pitching market moves a little bit slower sometimes. Teams wait to see how much money they have left to spend. I know there's several contenders that still need some pitching. I mean, you look at look at some of the contenders in the National League. You look at the Braves, probably need a right-handed reliever. The Padres need a couple of relievers. Because after the loss of Kirby Yates and Trevor Rosenthal, they definitely need relievers. There's several teams that still need something. The Yankees could maybe add another reliever from the right side after shipping off Ottavino. So we'll see what happens there. And then a lot of these guys have been kind of put. There's been rumors on a lot of these top starting pitchers and position players too. Because I think you look at Justin Turner, and I don't know what the situation is with the Dodgers' money now. If they can afford a Justin Turner, depending on what he wants to sign for, they're already very high above the salary cap. Plus, I think they're like $50 million ahead of the number 2 team in payroll. So I don't know what their cap is on that, but it is the Dodgers, so I guess it's kind of hard to tell. Uh, you know, Jackie Bradley, you're looking at the Mets. James Paxton, I'd be pretty surprised if he doesn't end up in Toronto. He's Canadian, and I think that's a place that he threw his no hitter there a couple years ago. Was real emotional about that. I think that's a place he probably wants to be, and I think he'd be a good candidate to help in that rotation. Taiwan Walker is a guy who I'm not super surprised hadn't signed yet. He's a guy that his peripherals aren't great. Even though he had a pretty good ERA this season, Jake Odorizzi, I'm sure he'll sign somewhere in the next week or two. And then Kevin Pillar is one of those guys who I think it's a bench bat type, and everyone needs a bench bat at this point, or a fourth outfielder. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But so far, Justin Turner, I think on a lot of sites was like the 7th to 10th ranked free agent. So we've got a lot of the free agents have signed so far. So kind of want to go into some winners and losers here in the last few minutes before we finish up the episode.
Yeah, a couple of the winners we have is the Blue Jays, who we've talked a lot about. Signing Marcus Semien, Kirby Yates, George Springer. Trading for Steven Matz, which be that what you may.
Yeah, I don't know about that one, but
It's still a move that they made this year. They're showing that they're ready to go for it. Hoping for big steps from Biggio and Bichette and Vlad Jr. I mean, this is going to be the year where Vlad Jr. is going to have to step up and really prove that he's the prospect that everybody thought he was. The Padres, which we've talked about all offseason, they've made high-profile moves to catch the Dodgers. Blake Snell, Yu Darvish, bringing in Ha-Seong Kim. I know Joe Musgrove. I know I'm missing another guy they brought in.
They brought back Profar.
Profar. They've made the moves to go out there and prove that they're ready as well. So, they're another winner we have. The Braves, re-signing Ozuna is a big deal for that team. Like you said, they could still use a couple of bullpen arms. Signing Charlie Morton, that's going to be a very underrated thing as well for that rotation. Especially with the uncertainty with Mike Soroka of what he's going to be, how healthy he's going to be this year. Having Charlie Morton as another guy, so Soroka doesn't have to feel that he has to rush himself back or carry so much of a burden that he hurts himself again. Um, that's very big. And on my side, at least, Matt, you can counter this if you want to. I think the Dodgers are still a winner this offseason. We're still up in the air about Justin Turner. They've lost Jock Peterson, Kike Hernandez, but re-signing Blake Trinan was really big. Signing Corey Knebel, Tommy Kahnle, those just depthing out that bullpen, and then the Trevor Bauer move. If you talked to me before this week, if who was a winner, I wouldn't say the Dodgers, but signing Trevor Bauer, I mean that's a game changer to me. That really pushes the Dodgers back and just furthers that they are probably the best team.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty accurate on all those. You look at the Dodgers, and those losses. I put a little question mark by it in my notes because those losses do hurt. But I think adding to that bullpen was very important because we saw the struggles that Kenley Jansen had at times last year, getting out of whack a little bit, and uh, you know, you're looking at a Brusader Graterol being the Gratterall being the closer, and he's young, he hadn't done it a lot, so bringing back those bullpen arms is big. And then obviously if you had Trevor Bauer, he was most people's number one free agent. That really helps. But the others there, I mean, Braves, you got to remember the Drew Smiley signing too. I think that's going to end up doing pretty well. I think he might end up being kind of a swing guy, and that's going to be real important. The Braves had terrible depth in the rotation last year, and now they've got probably 6 or 7 guys who would be in most rotations with still having a pretty good top of the rotation. So I think those are a couple good moves. The Blue Jays added the most to their offense out of anybody. They added probably the best hitter, not the best position player, which I think most people think is JT Realmuto, but the best hitter in the offseason in George Springer, who's still a good defensive player as well. And they added, Marcus Semien, who is an MVP candidate just year before last, and battled injuries in a shortened season. So but take a look at some of the teams that are losers this offseason too, and I think one of these is going to be pretty controversial because they have added a lot. But you look at the Indians, they seem like they're still kind of want to contend in a weird way. I mean, they got a good rotation still, but they traded Lindor. They just declined the option on hand. They traded longtime Indian Carlos Carrasco. They added Rosario and Hernandez back. Rosario being a new guy to that organization, and then Cesar Hernandez that bringing them back for a second season. They lost Carlos Santana too, didn't they?
Yep. Even for the
So
Royals.
yeah, so if you're, it's almost looks a little bit like a fire sale, but at the same time, they still haven't traded all their pieces. They're signing players to major league contracts, and they're, holding on to their most valuable piece, and Jose Ramirez that they could trade. That is a veteran. I mean, I don't know if Shane Bieber I think would be a potential guy that would move on and become the part of the next wave of Indians that contend, but so I doubt they would trade him regardless. The defending Cy Young winner, and a guy who looked in the shortened season, of course, but looked like one of the best pitchers in baseball. So but I thought that was kind of a weird offseason, and they took a step back. The Cubs, I think, have taken a big step back. They're kind of looking like they might stand pat a bit, but they also already traded Darvish, and they lost Schwarber to a non-tender. But they've added a few pieces. They added Jock Peterson and Andrew Chafin, Zach Davies. They added through the Darvish trade, but still, that was kind of weird. They lost Albert Almora as well. They're non-tendering and trading away players, but they aren't really going full blown trade, and they have a lot of rentals on their team still, and like Chris Bryant and Javier Baez, and I thought that was kind of a weird move. And they lost John Lester too. They didn't bring him back and refused to pay him like a $3 million salary that he asked to come back. So that was really weird in my opinion. The Reds, I've been kind of stunned at what they were doing all offseason because I felt like their roster was still really good and maybe had just a couple pieces, a couple turnarounds on their offensive side away from being a real contender, but they didn't even attempt to re-sign Trevor Bauer. Um, they they signed they non-tendered Archie Bradley, who ended up signing a pretty good deal with the Phillies. They traded Rizal Iglesias, which didn't make a ton of sense to me. A guy who's on last year of his deal, but he's a really solid relief pitcher. And then they signed a guy who really hasn't been good in the last few years, and Sean Doolittle, who has struggled mightily the last 2 years and has battled some injuries as well. And then the controversial one, I think it's the Mets, and I put them in here. They have added for sure. They added Francisco Lindor and Carlos Carrasco, which is huge, especially Lindor. But the Mets were talking about being in on everybody and spending stupid money in free agency, like some teams have said. And at times, people were talking about them being in on Trevor Bauer, obviously, and I think the Mets might have saved a lot of their money for Trevor Bauer, but they didn't sign him, and they were supposedly going after George Springer, didn't sign him. They were supposedly going after Marcell Ozuna, didn't sign him. You know, and the list goes on and on and on. The Mets were supposedly in on everybody and didn't sign anybody, and it turns out the best signing they made. Now they did get Lindor through trade, but Lindor is also a 1 year rental. You got to remember, best signing the Mets made was James McCann, and they signed a pretty big contract for a guy who's really only had one decent season, like only one season where he was legitimately a everyday player. So that was interesting. And then Jonathan VR they just signed today, and that's more of a depth piece than anything else. So you can't forget also the Trevor May signing. They added to their bullpen a little bit, but I mean, I felt like the Mets had an opportunity. They were talking about how much they were going to raise their payroll, new ownership. There was so much excitement, and they really didn't add much compared to what people were expecting them to. So I definitely don't think they did enough to catch the Braves, and I think they're still kind of neck and neck with the Phillies. So I think those are probably the losers, and of course the Mets with their additions are still, that's kind of controversial. You could even put them in the winners category, adding Lindor, um, but it's interesting to look at.
Yeah, I think to even put to the Mets pushing them to the winners, that would be really have to wait until after this season, because you have to see what they do with Lindor. If they're able to get a deal done to re-sign him, which you would expect it, but it's not done, so you can't write that down on paper. Um, so we'll see. I mean, pretty much everyone you hit on is absolutely right. I feel bad for Indians fans right there right now because that's going to be a really bad road that they're starting to head down. In that, they're in that purgatory right now where they're not going to win, but they're not going to lose. So they're going to be right in that gray area, and you do not want to be in that gray area during a rebuild time. It's just going to further hurt you know, the time you're going to come back to be contending. Um,
Yeah,
and the Cubs are right around that same thing as well.
yeah. I think one thing you can mention on the Indians is that with the current structure of their team, I think there is an outside chance with the rotation pieces they have and some of the pieces they've added in the last couple of years in the field, especially in the outfield, that the Indians could see themselves in contention in that division. I mean, the Twins are going to be pretty good. The White Sox, I think, are going to be really good. You could almost add the White Sox to winners this offseason, too. But, you look at the Indians and they still got probably the up and coming best pitcher in baseball. Probably wouldn't call him that yet, but he's getting close. And Shane Bieber. And then you've got a couple of other really good pieces in that rotation, and Savali, and you got Zach Plezak, and you know then you look at the lineup. They still got Jose Ramirez. They bring back Hernandez. Um, they've added Naylor last year. He seemed to kind of start to turn it on and figure things out. You maybe look for a bounce back from Franmil Reyes. Um, you bring in Andres Jimenez and Ahmed Rosario from the Mets, so you still do have decent pieces at shortstop and in the middle infield to go along with the. Although losing Lindor is huge, obviously he's a much better current player than those two guys. But I think the Indians' strategy to me seems to be like they're going to be the team that sells at the deadline, assuming that they're out of it. And I think that makes a little bit of sense. Teams will start to really kind of get desperate at the deadline with the lack of. I don't think there's going to be too many teams selling big pieces, and then you look at a team that might be selling an MVP level player like Jose Ramirez, and I think that might be an interesting look at the Indians and maybe even the Cubs too. If the Cubs are doing really good and Chris Bryant looks like Chris Bryant and Javier Baez bounces back and Jock Peterson plays really well in the new uniform. Jason Hayward and Ian Happ continue what they did, but the Cubs aren't really doing that well because they're pitching, then you might get to see the Cubs have some guys rebuild value and then move them at the deadline to contenders if they're not there. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for the Cubs or the Indians to be not non-contenders at the deadline too. They could end up adding at the deadline, so it'll be interesting to see. Um,
I could
it'll be
absolutely see the Cubs still making deals before this year, the
Oh,
season even
absolutely.
starts.
I mean, the offseason's not over. This is just their
Um,
current. Like, I mean,
so
if the Cubs end up trading everybody before the season starts, I'd be a little surprised that they would do it this late.
no,
But
I think if
you
anybody
know,
does, I mean, the one that's going to be it's going to be Chris Bryant.
yeah,
I don't. They're not going to move Rizzo, and I doubt they move Javi Baez. If they move anybody, it's going to be Chris
yeah,
Bryant for the
yeah,
season. And
and
that could be a move when if Justin Turner doesn't resign with the Dodgers, maybe the Dodgers go to the Cubs and try and get Chris Bryant. So
yeah, we'll see. And like I say, with the Dodgers, so other stuff that they could potentially add. I don't know how their money situation is after the.
their money's just fine.
Yeah,
Trust me.
well, I mean, I just don't know how much they can add. I'm sure that they can add something, but I
They
just don't know what it
I,
looks like.
from
So.
from everything I've heard that they're blowing past the luxury tax this year. They don't they're not looking at the luxury tax this year because they're going to be a first time offender, so the amount's going to be minimal. So right now they're only going to be paying like 7.2 million. Um and I mean that's without a third baseman, but if they do a trade and they have to trade somebody, there's enough salary somewhere where they can trade and get off. Joe Kelly's $8 million. If they want to trade David Price, that's 15 to 16 million dollars. So there's plenty
Yeah.
of money out there if they need to move it, but it doesn't sound like they're in any trouble because
Yeah.
past
Well, I don't
past
trouble's not the word I was looking
well
for. I was just looking
well
for adding 20 more million to
it,
the current.
what I'm trying to tell you is that they don't care because in
Yeah.
2023 and 2024 they have basically zero contracts on the books right now.
Yeah.
So they're not afraid to add more right now.
Yeah.
But
Well, we'll see what they end up doing. It'll be interesting. I'll look forward to seeing what happens here. So.
yeah. Well, this one's been a little bit extra longer, but we felt that we should bring that to you just right before spring training starts. Maybe next week, depending on the moves, we'll dive in a little bit deeper to some other stuff that's happened, through this off season that we haven't been able to spend enough time on or something. But um, at least for now, you got anything else you want to wrap up on?
Not really. We're like we talked about, we're getting down to, most of the top free agents assigned. There's still a few out there that are going to be impact players next year, but we're starting to look at teams and, what each team has and, maybe who the contenders are going to be, who the favorites are going to be, who's the teams that, probably aren't going to be quite so good. Um, I think it's going to be an exciting season. I'm really, really, really glad that they're going to start on time and that, I think it's going to go really well starting when they do. Every other professional sports organization has been playing. I mean, obviously there's some challenges involved, but for the most part, have been playing without a hitch this year. Um, you know, you look at, hopefully maybe by the time that um, the season starts here in April, the beginning of April or end of March, you might look at maybe having some fans in the stands. I'm sure it probably wouldn't be full capacity, but other sports are doing it just fine. Even the NBA, which has been really, really, really probably the most cautious organization during this whole pandemic, has been allowing some fans in some arenas. So, I'm excited to get back to seeing, hopefully my Braves play in person this year and, seeing some other teams play. And, maybe by the end of the year, we'll have a normal end of the season, pennant chases postseason with full crowds and all the craziness. And, I miss that. I miss it so much. The last week or so, I've been, watching YouTube videos and stuff of, games from the last several years and just the amount of crazy, fan reactions is so much fun. And it's something that's sorely missed in all sports right now. So
I've been doing the exact same
yeah,
thing.
I can't wait to see it back. So
Just itching for that to get back. But anyways, we've rambled for way too long already. But thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Bat Flip Podcast, and we'll catch you guys next week.
yep, thanks everybody.